What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to take a look at Gotham Knights 1 year later. If you can believe it, I mean, the year has gone by pretty darn quickly, but 1 year ago, Gotham Knights released to the world, and boy, it had its reception, both good and both bad. I think overall, it probably landed more on like average, right? I don't think, like, yes, the internet is going to push the greatest divide that it possibly can. You're going to see people that say that it was a perfect game. I don't even know how you can argue that, but some people I'm sure said it, 10s out of 10s. And then you also have people that would say it's the worst thing on planet Earth, which, by the way, is also just not, in my opinion at least, it's not true. It's just not true. This game I really do feel fell in between as I believed at the time slightly above average. I think I would still probably call it that now. Slightly above average game. A game that now looking back kind of came and went. You can argue like player basis and stuff, but this is a more personal video. We're going to be, looking back at the entire arc, the saga of this game. I look back and I think, yeah, there was a huge build-up to it, and I'll never forget it, right, for what it did to the channel and all of the Arkham Insurgency, videos that I did. This is a game that didn't explode my channel, but this is kind of how I got, Pirates of the Caribbean was like the earliest thing, but Batman, Arkham, and so leading into Gotham Knights, what we thought Gotham Knights was, Hogwarts Legacy, or the Harry Potter open world RPG. I mean, there's a couple pillars that I almost built the channel on, Kingdom Hearts back in the day, and Gotham Knights is one of them. It's like one of the 5 to 7, big things. So for that and what it kind of meant to me, it'll always be special. At the same time, I guess that almost makes the game more disappointing because it's like, I would have liked nothing more for this game to be a game of the year, game of the, generation. Obviously, those games are pretty hard to find, right? There's only a couple of them every time. I wanted that, but ultimately, that's absolutely not what we got from this game. What we got, I think, was, like I said, a slightly above. Well, okay, here's what we got. And here's what I firmly believe, and it's only gotten stronger, I think, as the 1 year has kind of gone on. The thing that's the most disappointing with this game is it tries to do more than one thing. And I think that's because of that live service push. I mean, it's a discussion and it's a theme that we talked about so much leading into Gotham Knights. We all, I believe, saw it coming. You could sense it. And then once you played the game, I think it's impossible to not see it. This was a game that I think went way more into the live service elements than the game itself shows. But you can sense that there was more in there. And you can sense that Marvel's, and I keep saying, Marvel's Avengers, I think, is one of the biggest failures, period, of all time, okay? And it's not to really, beat that game to death, because it already has been beaten to death. But not only what that game did to itself, okay? Because it certainly did stuff to itself and all that. But what it did to the industry after is also, you could feel its impact even years later, because here's the thing. The game comes out, and it doesn't work. The live service, that kind of, mentality or model for a game like Marvel's Avengers, flat out, I'm sure there's people that liked it. I actually know of people that liked it. Doesn't matter. The game, I think, universally did not work. They lost money. It wasn't impactful enough. It didn't last long term with enough players actually playing it. The proof is in literally the statistics, okay? So that stuff happened. And then I think any game that was in development that was even remotely close to it felt that ripple effect. I'd wager anything that Gotham Knights was told, WB Montreal was told to include multiple things in that game by their higher-ups. I don't even blame them. In fact, some of them have been following me and all that stuff. I think the people that worked on this game, hard workers, I think they're talented. I think they can do a much better job. And I don't even think the game is all that bad. I think they can do even better if they let them, kind of do what they're good at versus pushing things on them. But that's a side thing. Okay, so Marvel's Avengers comes out, and then Gotham Knights, a game that I think very much would have resembled it, okay? I think Suicide Squad was kind of going all the way, but Gotham Knights was kind of close. And then I think Gotham Knights got scared. I think WB got scared and said, hey, can we rip that stuff out of the game? And they said, well, here's the thing. You told us to build the whole game around, and that's it, right there. See, Gotham Knights was built around the idea of these live services. And what does that mean? The gear, those random crimes, the maybe DLC, ongoing, that didn't really end up happening, right? But that's the fundamentals of this game. Switching the characters, the co-op elements, leveling the enemies, that stuff, okay? So once Marvel's Avengers fails, I think the higher ups of WB say, well, this is a problem and we need to kind of like pivot. But the issue is gaming is very hard to pivot when you're making the game. So when you're already 2-3 years into making Gotham Knights, you can't just, remove everything and make it, say, like a full on, like an Arkham, like a single player, like pure single player thing. You can't do it. It's impossible. It's like Dragon Age, right? The rumor with Dragon Age is it was a multiplayer game, but EA decided, the higher up said, okay, we're not going to do the multiplayer thing, make your single player thing. And they probably caught it early enough so that they can make this upcoming, Dragon Age Dreadwolf, they could make it right. And Gotham Knights, I don't think got that luxury. Gotham Knights, I think, was too far into development where the game had to have some of these, underlying kind of themes or, the tone. It had to be in there. And I think that's represented when you play the actual game. I think you can see like the hauntings. It really is like a haunting of these elements that are still in the game. And if they weren't in the game, that would have been better, but it literally actually, I believe, would have been impossible because so much of the game was built on that. So, I know I spent so much time talking about it, but look, at the end of the day, I think that was the biggest mistake of the entire game. I think the story overall was pretty fine. Like the opening cutscene, they always do, and I don't even know, I think it's a different, like an outsourcing team that makes those super high cinematic cutscenes. I don't know if it's WB Montreal themselves, but they always like nail it with the Arkham game or Arkham Origins. I guess Rocksteady with Arkham in general, and then this game, like the Batman fight in the beginning, I still think to that. Yeah, it's like that's just an amazing cutscene. And was it a wise idea to kill Batman, have it rely on people in this new universe? Well, you could argue it, and there were so many people obviously that argued it. As I've always said, I was willing to give it a chance. I was willing to give it a chance and give these new characters a chance. And I think some did better than others. I think it kind of like relied on who you played as the most. Like Batgirl was kind of my main, and obviously I spent a lot of time like listening to her voice, and I thought she was pretty good. I think it kind of just depended on who you played as. Obviously, here's the thing. It was pretty predictable, right? Like the story overall, you saw a lot of things coming. Some of the bigger moments in it weren't as impactful as you'd like it to be. It looked good. Now you could, okay, when I say it looked good, like cutscenes looked good. I think the world did look good. Obviously, when you have those like side-by-side comparisons of Gotham Knights and Arkham Knight, it's actually scary how good Arkham Knight, number one, was back in 2015, but number two, how good it still looks now. So while, playing Gotham Knights on like the Xbox Series X, which is what I had it on, I thought it looked pretty darn good. When you think about, I think there was another level. There was another level there that I don't think it quite, hit. So story, slightly average, maybe slightly above, slightly below, depending on how you view it. The combat, oh boy, the combat, I think partially you could blame because of the live service stuff. Here's the thing. I think when you're playing the combat, or when you're fighting, literally, with other people, with a cooperative, online person, I think the game is more fun. I said that last time. I think, like, the wave-based mode stuff that they added in after, there is a problem. I'm actually going to get to this, but say the earlier levels. When you're able to, like, beat enemies with relative ease, they don't have a lot of health. They're not, like, bullet sponges, but you're, hitting with them with melee attacks, right? When they're doing that, even if you're playing by yourself, I think the game is pretty okay. When you're doing it with somebody else, I think the game is even better, okay? What I think the problem with a game like this is the enemies that take freaking years, right, to take out, and just how that kind of looks on screen, and it's not engaging enough. And obviously they tried to balance that with the powers and with, different gadgets and stuff, and it works to some extent. But, I mentioned the wave thing, and that was a very love-hate kind of thing for me, because I actually think, again, early on in those waves, it's a lot of fun. I think the enemies, because they're not bullet sponges, it's fun to beat them up and to, okay, I'll take like this area, you take that area. You can play it with friends, and specifically the wave mode, right? Being able to play with more than just two people. I think it worked really well. However, once you start getting to the enemies that just take years to actually beat them up, you start to realize, okay, this style of game, my personal opinion, it doesn't work. It really doesn't work for this superhero style. And I'm not saying like Arkham or even Spider-Man, I'm not saying like that's the only way to do it. That's the way that's been the most successful, and obviously it's been copied before. We haven't really had, I guess, another style in that same kind of genre of games we haven't had a different style that has overwhelmingly worked. And maybe, that maybe opens up the door to say, okay, well, come up with something. I will say, I don't think what they did here is what would work, what would actually be something you can copy going forward. Now, like Wolverine might act in the same kind of like free flow combat that's maybe a little bit different, right? But it actually might be a while. Maybe Wonder Woman. Like, we need another game, I think, that does combat differently than the free flow and the Arkham/Spider-Man thing. It needs to be different than that, but it also can't be this. And like, you just have to try it and see if it, works. But I think the bullet spongy kind of stuff, it just doesn't, it's not as engaging, it's not fun. It's not as fun to play. Again, it is more fun when you're playing with other people, but then you get into the more like deep roots thing with this game of like the side stuff or like the crimes that'll happen, and it just gets repetitive. And I mean, that's a problem with a lot of these games, I suppose. Even a thing like Spider-Man's crimes, you could argue, those get repetitive, but these get pretty darn repetitive, pretty darn fast. And so, ultimately the game just ends up being kind of average. Like, it's sad, and it's almost like, I mean, I guess I said it, like, it's almost the worst case scenario, because you kind of want it. Well, of course you want it to be really, really good, okay? At least that's what I wanted going in. I think generally gamers, when they're like hyped for something or when they just want to play games, they probably want the best, for that game. There's like console warriors and different like factions online, on Twitter and stuff that, if a game does really bad, then they have their heyday, right? They would obviously really, really like that. But generally, I think you want it to be good. But like, this game kind of falls in the middle, right? I really don't think this game is terrible by any means. I think that's kind of crazy. There's plenty of worse games, out there that released last year, that released, like, you look at a game like Gotham or Redfall or Forspoken, or like the list, it's actually too long this year, because although this year has been so many great games, there's also been some absolutely terrible ones. If you think Gotham Knights is worse than like a game like Gotham or Redfall, you're like, those games literally functionally do not work, or they're just absolutely terrible, whereas Gotham Knights is not. So it's not the worst thing, but it's also not the best. It kind of falls in that average. And again, it's almost worst case scenario where you say it could have been so much better. If they literally just started it as not, in my opinion, I think they started as a live service game. And if they didn't do that, I think a lot of the issues, like not all of them, but I think some of them, maybe like 60, 70%, would have kind of been wiped away immediately. Now, they could have been replaced with other issues. I'm not saying like you immediately make it a perfect game. It could have been replaced with something else, but I think you wouldn't have had what we got with Gotham Knights. And I mean, the final, I guess, part of this is kind of like its legacy and players and all that. And look, the game actually sold pretty darn well. They were never too vocal, but I think we've made videos on it. Like, we found past employees, current employees that have put it on their profiles. Now, this game has done I think 4 or 5 million units is what this game did, at least like relatively close to launch. I mean, I think this game probably did 6+ million units in all, which is very good. That's a very good number. So I think this game was successful in terms of money. I think this game sets WB Montreal up to do more stuff. I think they can get better from. I really don't think they go backwards. I think they can get better. Now, a lot of people have also left. A lot of the heads of the team that made specifically Gotham Knights, they're gone. So you look at the second team that's making whatever, the team that I guess made Gotham Knights, right? That's the thing. So there's a team that's separate that's been working on a game for, probably 3 or so years. Then there's the Gotham Knights team that seemingly is working on a game that's also like Gotham Knights, but the other team sounds like it's just a single-player game. So, like, I think we're going to have some diversity from Montreal and hopefully some really cool experiences. I know, saying, like, should they give us a Superman game? I know they haven't really earned our trust. And trust me, I'm there too. Like, Arkham Origins was now 10 years old, right? And then you have this game that took forever. Now, obviously, they had so many canceled projects. They have not proven to be like a top tier, like by no means. They're still in a prove it kind of mode to me. And Gotham Knights is kind of a big part of that, right? Because you did nothing, technically, right? You had canceled games, but nothing released up until Gotham Knights. You do Gotham Knights, and it's slightly above, slightly below. It is, however you fall on it. And that's not enough to say, okay, well, this is like a top-tier team. So they still have more work to do. But, looking back at it, beyond the player base, I will say this feels like a game that has come and gone. And modern day, I mean, to be honest, okay, modern day, most games are like that. So it's not the worst case scenario. I mean, you obviously don't want a game that kind of comes and people talk about it for a month. And I think being in like the DC kind of sphere, right? People will always talk about Gotham Knights, maybe not in a good way, but it'll always be talked about. And maybe, actually, maybe in some ways it is okay because at least it gets talked about. So many games, modern day, because there's like hundreds that come out a year, so many games get buried, right? They'll come out, even if they're good. Even if they're good games. How many people talk about Plague Tale Requiem besides me? I'm like the only one who talked about it back then or talks about it now. That was my game of the year last year by a lot. So nobody talks about it. And I just think it's because you have like 20 games that released just in October. Who's talking about, all 20 of them? Very few. So for Gotham Knights, from like a legacy perspective, I think it's largely been forgotten. I think when people think about it, at least from what I see a lot of like it came and went. Nobody really thinks about it, nobody really talks about it all that much, and that's not great. But it's also not abnormal because most games have that sense. It just is, I guess, the one thing you could say. Again, disappointing in the sense that I don't know if it potentially had the potential to go all the way and be something like absolutely massive, but you hope for that, right? You want games that are top. You want like an Arkham replica that can, not like literally copying, I mean like a game that is that impactful, that is that big, that you're always talking about. But the thing is, those games come very rarely, right? Like there's a reason why the Arkham games are so special, or game like an Assassin's Creed 2, right? Like these games aren't like every month. They come out every so often and they kind of define something and people steal from them and you keep going. So Gotham Knights is obviously not that. It's more of like a warning of what almost not to do. But again, I honestly think that they did probably as close as they could have done, to making this game good with how they started. Because I really, there's no evidence of this, by the way. This is just my opinion, but I love to be proven wrong. I really believe this game started as something. They got scared midway. Whoever got scared, bigwigs, the workers themselves, whoever. Somebody got scared. They changed it. They tried to change it the best they could, and obviously it wasn't enough. But I think the start was the problem. And if they didn't do it like that, maybe it could have been, all this could have been avoided. So let me know what you guys think in the comments about Gotham Knights. When you played it a year later, let me know. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.